Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the Kevin Michael Grace Show. So, the theme of today's show is the Andromeda Strain 2, Wuhan Boogaloo. Some of you might catch the reference there to the Michael Crichton novel, which was made into a successful movie. First up, from Gilmore Health News, Chinese coronavirus is a man-made virus, according to Luc Montagnier, the man who discovered HIV. Contrary to the narrative that is being pushed by the mainstream that the COVID-19 virus was the result of a natural mutation and that it was transmitted to humans from bats via pangolins, Dr. Luc Montagnier, the man who discovered the HIV virus back in 1983, disagrees and is saying that the virus was man-made. The professor, who is the 2008 Nobel Prize winner for medicine, so I think we can all agree that he is a certified expert, claims that SARS-CoV-2 is a manipulated virus that was accidentally released from a laboratory in Wuhan, China. Chinese researchers are said to have used coronaviruses in their work to develop an AIDS vaccine. HIV DNA fragments are believed to have been found in the SARS-CoV-2 genome. We knew that the Chinese version of how the coronavirus emerged was increasingly under attack, but here's a thesis that tells a completely different story about the COVID-19 pandemic, which is already responsible for more than 110,000 deaths worldwide. According to the professor who won the Nobel Prize for discovering HIV as the cause of the AIDS epidemic, together with Françoise Barré-Sinoussi, the SARS-CoV-2 is a virus that was manipulated and accidentally released from a laboratory in Wuhan in the last quarter of 2019. This laboratory, known for its work on coronaviruses, tried to use one of these viruses as a vector for HIV in a search for an AIDS vaccine. With my colleague, biomathematician Jean-Claude Perez, we carefully analyzed the description of the genome of this RNA virus, Montagnier explained, adding that others have already explored this avenue. Indian researchers have already tried to publish the results of the analyses that showed that this coronavirus genome contained sequences of another virus, the HIV virus, but they were forced to withdraw their findings as the pressure from the mainstream was too great. In a challenging question, his interviewer, Dr. Jean-François Lemoine, inferred that the coronavirus under investigation may have come from a patient who is otherwise infected with HIV. No, says Luc Montagnier, in order to insert an HIV sequence into this genome, molecular tools are needed, and that can be done only in a laboratory. In any case, this thesis, defended by Professor Montagnier, has a positive turn. According to him, the altered elements of this virus are eliminated as it spreads. Nature does not accept any molecular tinkering. It will eliminate these unnatural changes, and even if nothing is done, things will get better, but unfortunately, after many deaths. Asia Times says that these statements by the Nobel Prize winner have sparked a scientific firestorm. According to him, the presence of elements of HIV in the genome of the new virus and even elements of the germ of malaria are highly suspect. The industrial accident was said to have taken place in the Wuhan National Biosafety Laboratory. So, obviously, much criticism for this. Virologist Etienne Simon Laurière of the Institut Pasteur in Paris told Agence France-Presse, that does not make sense. These are very small elements that we find in other viruses of the same family, other coronaviruses in nature. These are pieces of the genome that actually look a lot like sequences in the genetic material of bacteria, viruses, and plants. If we take a word from a book and it looks like another word, can we say that one has copied from the other? This is absurd! Exclamation point. So here's a problem with the scientific dictatorship that not all scientists agree all the time. We have certainly seen this during the COVID-19 hysteria. to wit, masks. Everyone should wear masks. No, no one should wear masks. Well, we should wear masks, but the masks that we have should be reserved for health professionals. Oh, and by the way, if you're wearing masks, be very careful how you wear them, because apparently it's possible to wear them the wrong way. Oh, with regard to the worship of scientists, I was walking along Government Street early this morning. Every day I walk from my hotel to the Save On Foods on Pandora Street downtown, taking care to avoid the tent city as much as I can. And I saw on a construction hoarding, someone had used spray paint to do portraits of Dr. Bonnie Henry, who is the Chief Medical Officer of the province of British Columbia, and Dr. Theresa Tam, the native of China, who is Canada's Chief Medical Officer. It was quite flattering to Dr. Tam, who, in all honesty, has a frightful visage. But is this for real? Are ordinary people doing this? Oh yes, Dr. Tam and Dr. Henry are doing so much to protect us. Well, keep in mind that Dr. Tam is the woman who, clearly taking World Health Organization guidance on this issue, declared at the very beginning that the Wuhan virus, COVID-19 coronavirus, whatever you want to call it, was not really a major threat. The major threat was, wait for it, stigmatization, xenophobia, racism. And I suppose that's enough to make her a public hero. From Fox News, U.S. officials confirm full-scale investigation of whether coronavirus escaped from Wuhan lab. Intelligence operatives are said to be gathering information about the laboratory and the initial outbreak of the virus. Intelligence analysts are piecing together a timeline of what the government knew and creating an accurate picture of what happened. Once that investigation is complete, something that is expected to happen in the near term, the findings will be presented to the Trump administration. At that point, White House policymakers and President Trump will use the findings to determine how to hold the country accountable for the pandemic. Fox News first reported on Wednesday that there is increasing confidence that the outbreak likely originated in a Wuhan lab, not as a bioweapon, but as part of a Chinese effort to show that its efforts to identify and combat viruses are equal or greater than those of the U.S. And how do you combat a virus? By making a super virus. And this super virus is allegedly a threat to the entire world and has ushered in a new normal. We are never going back to the way things were. So perhaps we can just jump the gun here and say that this kind of research is pointless at best and criminal at worst. Sources point to the structure of the virus and saying that the genome mapping specifically shows that it was not genetically altered. The sources believe the initial transmission of the virus was a naturally occurring strain that's being studied there and then went into the population in Wuhan. Sources say the investigation of open source and classified data points to the work in the lab of Dr. Shi Zhengli, who was working on antivirals and immunizations for coronavirus, specifically with bats. U.S. officials are 100% confident China went to great lengths to cover up after the virus was out. Additionally, the sources believe that the WHO, which the president paused funding to this week over its role in the crisis, was either complicit in the cover-up or looked the other way. The president hinted at an investigation on Wednesday when he told Fox News' John Roberts, more and more, we're hearing the story. We are doing a very thorough examination of this horrible situation. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Friday reiterated, or repeated, one might say, that the administration was eyeing the Wuhan Institute of Virology and accused the Chinese government of stonewalling scientists from finding out what happened. Let's go to the chat, see if anything is happening there. Lighting good today. Well, I opened the curtains. I'm sitting at a desk, which is in front of a big window. which has two sets of curtains. It's got muslin curtains, and it has very thick curtains. They'd previously been closed. I opened them about 15 inches, but I've left the muslin curtains drawn. And I guess it does look the best, actually. My skin is actually, it looks rather natural. Chogan King 666 says, lady yelled at me today for not wearing a mask. Really freaked out. Also, F these clapping, pot banging people. Jonathan Paul responds, go to Gulag, Chogo. CD Kaleo says, suit matches the couch. Nice. Well, it's just a happy accident. YT, Kevin is drunk? No, far from it. Again from Chogokin 666, I feel like Solzhenitsyn with this absurdity. Yeah, I don't know about this. It just seems like plain madness. Just seems like a panic, pure panic. The panic of a thoroughly feminized society. YT says, spent the day today on video with the most liberal of all liberals of New York City. What a bad thing. It's like we live in different worlds, heard several insults just randomly at right-wingers and Germans. Germans? I thought Angela Merkel said yesterday that all of the restaurants and bars and movie theaters and the like were to be shut until the end of August. So she certainly has the panic. Don from Beyond says, I am so mad right now. Manfred von Thistlebaum says, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, there's a lot of people who feel that way, but this panic has revealed a binary society. YT says, everyone hysterical about Corona and happy about lockdown extension. Half of them fled upstate to their suburbia homes, nice and comfy, but I thought that was forbidden. Dawn from Beyond explains that she should be making money now with her DoorDash app crashes, but with DoorDash, but the app crashes have made it impossible. Well, very nice comment from Mary Crow comparing me to Mencken and Chesterton. Too kind, too kind. Great shadows. Okay. All right, let's go back to the show and let's go back to, let's talk about Bill Gates. Event 201, a global pandemic exercise. This is from the official website, the Center for Health Security.org, the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, hosted Event 201, a high-level pandemic exercise on October 18, 2019 in New York, New York. The exercise illustrated areas where public/private partnerships will be necessary during the response to a severe pandemic in order to diminish large-scale economic and societal consequences. Well, that didn't seem to have worked. In recent years, the world has seen a growing number of epidemic events amounting to approximately 200 events annually. Okay, if there's 200 of them and society wasn't collapsing for this year, well, how is COVID-19 different? These events are increasing and they are disruptive to health, economics, and society. Managing these events already strains global capacity, even absent a pandemic threat. Well, then maybe it's time to start winding down globalism. Experts agree that it's only a matter of time before one of these epidemics becomes global. Very prescient there, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. A pandemic with potentially catastrophic consequences, a severe pandemic, which becomes Event 201, would require reliable cooperation among several industries, national governments, and key international institutions, such as perhaps the World Health Organization, which is a particular friend and beneficiary of Bill and Melinda Gates. Keep in mind that the WHO, which is led by an Ethiopian communist, assured us all, like Dr. Theresa Tam, that it's not a big problem. It can't even be communicated from person to person. The real problem is xenophobia, stigmatization, and racism. So, yeah, okay. So Bill Gates arranges for a pandemic talking session. Let's get all of these experts together and talk about what is necessary during a really, really scary pandemic with potentially catastrophic consequences. And shortly thereafter, November, say 2 months later, we get such a pandemic. Coincidence? Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll need criminal investigations. DNYUZ, which Drudge keeps linking to. I don't know what DNYUZ even stands for, and apparently no one seems to know who owns it, what its provenance is, but never mind that. Bill Gates, at odds with Trump on virus, becomes a right-wing target. In a 2015 speech, Bill Gates warned that the greatest risk to humanity was not nuclear war, but an infectious virus that could threaten the lives of millions of people. That speech has resurfaced in recent weeks with 25 million new views on YouTube, but not in the way that Gates probably intended. Anti-vaccinators, members of the conspiracy group QAnon, and right-wing pundits have instead seized on the video as evidence that one of the world's richest men planned to use a pandemic to wrest control of the global health system. I can't imagine why anyone would come to that conclusion. Gates, 64, the Microsoft co-founder turned philanthropist, has now become the star of an explosion of conspiracy theories about coronavirus. In posts on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, he is being falsely portrayed as the creator of COVID-19, as a profiteer from a virus vaccine, and as part of a dastardly plot to use the illness to cull or surveil the global population. The wild claims have gained traction with conservative pundits like Laura Ingraham and anti-vaccinators such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., as Gates has emerged as a vocal counterweight to President Trump on the coronavirus. For weeks, Gates has appeared on TV, on op-ed pages, and in Reddit forums, calling for stay-at-home policies, expanded testing, and vaccine development. Yeah, everyone has to stay home and consume the internet. Everyone must be tested. Perhaps we can, build up a DNA library of everyone on Earth, and vaccine development, because vaccines are just the best. Everyone needs to be vaccinated, perhaps several times a year for all manner of things. And when I graduated from high school, I was given a little card, folding card. I still have it, that listed all of the vaccinations that I had received during grades 1 to 12. We'll get to this a little later, but it is now being suggested that for whatever liberties we're going to be allowed to keep in the new normal, we will have to have a vaccination ID with us at all times. Misinformation about Gates is now the most widespread of all coronavirus falsehoods tracked by Signal Labs, a media analysis company. The misinformation includes more than 16,000 posts on Facebook this year about Gates and the virus that were liked and commented on nearly 900,000 times, according to a New York Times analysis. On YouTube, the 10 most popular videos spreading lies about Gates, posted in March and April, were viewed almost 5 million times. Gates, who is worth more than $100 billion, has effectively assumed the role occupied by George Soros, the billionaire financier and Democratic donor who has been a villain for the right. That makes Gates the latest individual, along with Dr. Anthony Fauci, the leading U.S. infectious disease expert, to be ensnared in the flow of right-wing punditry that has denigrated those who appear to be at odds with Trump on the virus. Well, are they? Really? Because Fauci and Birx have said, doctors Fauci and Birx have said repeatedly that they have given Trump advice, and Trump has followed that advice. Whitney Phillips, assistant professor at Syracuse University who teaches digital ethics. It's like something out of the HBO series Silicon Valley. Bill Gates is easily transformed into a health-related meme and figure because he's so well known. He's able to function as a kind of abstract boogeyman. Well, actually not an abstract boogeyman, a real boogeyman. Gates wrote in the Washington Post on March 31st, "There's no question the United States missed the opportunity to get ahead of the novel coronavirus." Oh, yes, let's say by cutting off flights from China before anyone else did. He seems to have been ahead of the curve there. The choices we and our leaders make now will have an enormous impact on how soon case numbers start to go down, how long the economy remains shut down, and how many Americans will have to bury a loved one because of COVID-19. Well, you see, as I will talk about soon, there are costs associated with an economic shutdown and a quarantine, very severe costs. And from what I've seen, it seems entirely likely, in fact probable, that more people are going to die as the result of the response to COVID-19 than of COVID-19 itself. Mark Sussman, chief executive of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, said it was distressing that there are people spreading misinformation when we should all be looking for ways to collaborate and save lives. Collaborate and save lives means to follow the WTO line. Misinformation means any claim or opinion which is at odds with the dominant narrative. The conspiracy theories about Gates may particularly damage what people think about a future coronavirus vaccine. Well, we're not even done with this one, and we're worrying about the future ones. This from Claire Wardle, executive director of First Draft, an organization that fights online disinformation. She said the narratives have the potential to kick off coordinated and sophisticated online campaigns that turn people against taking a virus vaccine. YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, which also owns Instagram, said they were fighting coronavirus misinformation. Gates' disdain for Trump, who he has met several times, has now become public. Yeah, you see, the problem with Donald Trump, as Bill Gates would see it, is that he was elected president of the United States, and he has powers that Gates does not have. In February, Gates weighed in on the illness, warning in the New England Journal of Medicine. Wait a minute. The New England Journal of Medicine is what? One of the top 5 medical journals in the world. And we have Bill Gates writing for it. Bill Gates is not a physician. He's not a statistician. He has no expertise in any of these areas. But he does have over $100 billion. Falsehoods about Gates took off. The first mention of a baseless conspiracy connecting him to the outbreak was on January 21st, according to the Times. That was when a YouTube personality linked to QAnon, of course, you're not going to name that person. All people who challenge the narrative are rightly nameless. This person suggested on Twitter that Gates had foreknowledge of the pandemic. The tweet was based on a coronavirus-related patent from the Pirbright Institute, a British group that received funding from the Gates Foundation. The patent was not for COVID-19. It was connected to a potential vaccine for a different coronavirus that affects poultry. Okay, the idea spread. And some of the theories tapped into Gates' acquaintance with Jeffrey Epstein, the financier who was convicted of sex trafficking and committed suicide. Did he now? Saying a global elite had banded together to create the coronavirus. Well, Gates' acquaintance, as this article puts it, is indeed noteworthy. Epstein had a private jet and he had a private island. Actually, it just occurs to me now that Bill Gates used to have a private island not far from Victoria. Now, I know it's not in the Caribbean. Bill Gates has over $100 billion. Bill Gates could you know, private jet as big as he wants, private yacht as big as he wants, islands if he wanted them. So what else did Epstein have to appeal to people like Bill Gates? I wonder. Bill Gates made many trips on the Lolita Express to Pedo Island even after Epstein was released from prison. So let's move on. Lead researcher at Wuhan virus lab warned that SARS-like coronavirus outbreaks linked to bats could happen in China almost a year before COVID-19 hit the city. The ominous prediction came from a study carried out by Shi Zhengli and her colleagues at the Wuhan Institute of Virology when they stressed the importance of conducting investigations of viruses from bats. She, nicknamed the Batwoman, allegedly sequenced the genes of the new coronavirus in 3 days after the epidemic merged, but was silenced by her boss. COVID-19, the disease caused by the new coronavirus, has killed more than 145,000 people and infected over 2 million worldwide since the pandemic began in Wuhan last December. The Wuhan Institute, a £34 million institute affiliated to the Chinese Academy of Sciences, has become the center of controversy amid the global crisis. Startling theories claim that the virus, officially known as SARS-CoV-2, came from the institute, which has a 4-story lab with the highest biosafety level of P4. Yes, I will remind listeners that the U.S. State Department was on this 2 years ago when it sent senior diplomatic personnel to tour the lab and sent memos to the State Department expressing grave concern at the lack of safety measures there. The stark warning was part of a research paper submitted by Shi, the deputy director at the Institute, and 3 co-authors in January 2019. It was published in March by MDPI, a publisher of peer-reviewed open-access journals. In the article, the team highlighted the likelihood of another coronavirus epidemic in China by analyzing 3 large-scale outbreaks caused by the severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, MERS, and swine acute diarrhea syndrome, SADS, respectively. It said that all 3 were pathogens. These pathogens were coronaviruses and could be traced back to bats. 2 of them had originated in China. Again, the Chinese are known to be resolutely unsentimental about animals. So it turns out that bats keep causing these deadly diseases. So why don't the Chinese simply exterminate them? I think it would be well within their ability to do so. Xi's team pointed out that China's size, population, and biodiversity could propel the spread of the potential bug. It also underlined the Chinese tradition of favoring fresh meat. Chinese food culture maintains that live slaughtered animals are more nutritious, and this belief may enhance viral transmission. I don't know. Sounds kind of xenophobic, racist even, to me. And again, from the Daily Mail, China increases Wuhan's COVID-19 death tale by 50% to 3,869, raising suspicions that Beijing has hidden the true scale of its coronavirus crisis. Why would anyone take seriously any numbers from China? I don't know. Maybe it's 4,000, maybe it's 40,000, maybe it's 400,000. How would we ever know? China is not an open society. There is nothing even resembling a free press there. A dissent is not allowed. Dissenters are liable to be kidnapped or executed. There's no point in anyone taking seriously any data from China because in Alan Clark's well-known phrase, they are notorious for being economical with the actuality. There's a piece yesterday by Greg Maresca from The Remnant, which I highly recommend, You don't miss water until your well runs dry. The same could be said for penicillin. The last American company to produce penicillin closed up shop in 2004. According to the U.S. Senate Committee on Finance, the Chinese are the global kingpins of medical equipment, prescription drugs, and their supplements, producing 80% of the world's supply. It was 2 years ago that Rosemary Gibson delivered a detailed portrait of China's growing dominance of the medical drug and equipment market in her book, China RX, Exposing the Risks of America's Dependence on China for Medicine. If all this isn't a wake-up call, then what is? Now, I'm sure that many people woke up one day to be rather surprised, shocked, even outraged. What China controls all of this and that and the other, and we are utterly dependent on China for all of these things, many of which are vital, many of which have national security implications. Who let this happen? Who let this happen? Well, our elite let it happen. Well, that would be wrong to say they let it happen. They made it happen. For all sorts of reasons. The neoliberals were of the belief that capitalism cures all ills. Specifically, that authoritarianism is not possible where capitalism, or whatever variant the Chinese employ, is there. Now, this has turned out to be grossly wrong, grossly wrong, as China has seized more and more of the world economy and become more central, crucial to it. It has become increasingly repressive. Repressive in a way which suggests, I don't know, James Bond villains. For instance, the Uyghurs, who are Muslim, are literally being bred out of existence. The men are being put in prison or executed or sent into forced labor, and the women are being forcibly married off to Han Chinese. So perhaps in a generation or two, if the Chinese communists have their way, there will be no more Uyghurs left. Where is the hue and cry about this? Why is it that Russia is supposedly the meanest country in the world, when that laurel clearly belongs to China? Will people be held accountable for this? Well, I don't know. It would be a titanic struggle, because the people responsible for this are the people who run the world. They are responsible for it. They said that, well, it's not efficient to make these things in the West. It can be done more cheaply in China. Well, never mind that wages are low there and environmental regulations barely exist, and that, you have to put up suicide nets around buildings like Foxconn to prevent workers from taking their own lives, because those lives are so bleak. But no, let's let China do all this. Let's put in place a just-in-time supply system, which is absolutely dominated by China. I mean, what could go wrong? It's as if 2007, 2008 never happened. Yeah, some financial institutions get in trouble in 2007, and in 2008, the world the economy almost comes to a complete stop. So how about scaling down? How about introducing more redundancy into the system? How about start bringing back manufacturing, particularly of things with national security implementations to the West? No, we can't do that. Oh, yeah, things would cost more money. Oh, yeah, it's like the argument about illegals out in the fields. Oh, what, your cabbage is going to cost $5 now? No, that's not how it works, because labor is a very small part of the cost. And I would guess that something like 95% of the savings go into the pockets of the agribusinesses that grow the cabbages and other vegetables. Oh, the intelligence community. Well, they're not very keen on Donald Trump. And what did we read? That it was 17 or 23 of them put together some report blasting him, Putin, puppet, something like that. We know that they were heavily involved in a coup attempt. Well, first they tried to sabotage his campaign, and then they were involved in a 3-year-long coup attempt. So what have they been up to lately? This is from the Times of Israel, which I don't think this could be accused of being an anti-Semitic media organ. U.S. intelligence agencies alerted Israel to the coronavirus outbreak in China already in November, Israeli television reported Thursday. According to Channel 12 News, the U.S. intelligence community, there's an oxymoron for you, became aware of the emerging disease in Wuhan in the second week of that month and drew up a classified document. Information on the disease outbreak was not in the public domain at that stage and was known only apparently to the Chinese government. U.S. intelligence informed the Trump administration, which did not deem it of interest, but the report said the Americans also decided to update 2 allies with the classified document, NATO and Israel, specifically the IDF. Other stories I've seen suggested that the White House was not given this information. The blame game is being played now, and the globalists are desperate not to have the finger pointed at them. At around 5:30, going to be talking about Walker Percy's Lost in the Cosmos. And of course, blame is one of those qualities or attributes which is unique to human beings. It doesn't exist in any other creatures. So, what does Jim Kunstler have to say? Well, I guess, he has been talking about the long emergency for, 15 years or so? He's been accused of one of those people looking forward to doom, and I don't really think that's fair. But the thing about doom mongers is that they only have to be right once. And Kunstler has been warning for a very long time that our scaled economy is simply not sustainable and that it is subject to crippling shocks. For instance, the price of oil. If the price of oil is $75 or above, the economy begins to close down. If the price of oil falls below $75, oil exploration and production begins to crater. Anyway, he writes this morning, this age of battling narratives tends to conceal the broken consensus behind it. What's gone is a broad social agreement that there are certain fundamental realities and then codes of conduct that follow from them. When anything goes, don't expect people to do the right thing or even know what it is. The COVID-19 debacle presents just such a set of quandaries and puzzles. For many people stewing in quarantine, the virus is just another evil phantom lurking in the permanent twilight zone of television, and even there, among the familiar jabbering figments, there's little agreement about it. The statistical projections mutate weekly. It's no worse than any annual flu. It's a savage illness that attacks every organ in the body, leaves survivors maimed, and you can even catch it again. The lockdowns are imperative. The lockdowns amount to economic suicide. There's no sorting it all out, and the uncertainty itself is intolerable. The only certainty is that most of the people in lockdown are going broke fast. By any ordinary rules, they are wiped out. They can't even pretend anymore to keep juggling all those monthly payments for rent or mortgages, food, the cars, the medical insurance, the electricity, the cable, and on and on. The $1,200 mad money checks promised by Uncle Sam are a little consolation for that, and the small business loans, if you can even jump through the infuriating hoops to get them, just pile on an additional layer of obligation in a lifetime of debt serfdom. You don't have to leap too many steps ahead mentally to imagine utter personal ruin on that glide path. And so what if millions of others are feeling squashed by the same phantom forces of disease and finance? One firm reality is this. The global debt system that supported the turbocharged global economy was disintegrating badly in the early fall of 2019, threatening every financial asset and the markets that affected to manage them, and all the operations of modern daily life that they represented. Nowhere on earth was the debt load more out of control than in China, where there were no constraints whatsoever on the bank's accounting fraud, since they answered solely to the ruling party, which had but one overarching policy: to keep ruling. And the biggest economic fiction of all was that China could maintain its supernatural growth rates in a world that had finally reached the limits of growth. Trump's trade wars sent tremors through the system. A whole lot of bad loans were about to be flushed down the drain. Banks everywhere else felt the vibrations too, you may be sure. The Wuhan virus was at least a very convenient distraction from all that. And then the darn thing got loose on countless airline flights around the world. Corona-19 didn't initiate the financial disorders of the moment in the US and Europe, but it ensured that there would not be another appearance of any recovery, a la the central bank interventions of 2008 to 2009. What it portends is a fast-track journey to a whole new disposition of things. First, for a while, a harsher, hungrier, angrier society of broken promises and dashed expectations, and then adaptation when a consensus emerges that the set of facts at hand about to a new reality. In the meantime, we're living in the meantime, which is not a comfortable place. I'll just comment here that even if one dismisses the very possibility that Bill Gates had anything to do with COVID-19, he is certainly part of the elite consensus that says that, oh, yes, the big money men must be made whole. I mean, we can't have them pay the price for creating a bubble, which has got larger and larger and larger and larger. And as Counselor points out, the coronavirus it works, doesn't it? If it were simply a case of the big money men paying the price for their foolishness and greed, which they avoided, in 2007, 2008, 2009, lessons were supposedly learned, but no lessons were learned. So maybe the elite thought that, oh dear, it's all falling apart again, and it's not going to be so easy for us to be made whole again. Hey, look over there, a squirrel. No, not a squirrel, the coronavirus. Well, this is the greatest pandemic since the Spanish flu, and that will serve as the excuse for us being made whole. Counselor continues, money is not an economy. Money is a medium of exchange within an economy where people grow things, make things, move things, and serve each other in countless ways. We're not going to replace all those growings, makings, movings, and services by just giving people money. Money may produce more money by the magic of compound interest, but money is not necessarily wealth. It just represents our ideas about wealth, and interest stops compounding anyway when the trend is clearly for reduced growings, makings, movings, and servicings. That's exactly how and why capital vanishes. The hocus pocus of modern monetary theory can only pretend to work around that reality. The world never reached such a pitch of activity up to the blow-ups of 2008, and it went through the motions for a decade after that. Now that that's stopped, all that's left is the law of gravity, and it doesn't get more basic. The wealth acquired in the decade, since by the so-called 1%, was loaded onto a defective aircraft like a Boeing 737 MAX, and an awful lot of it will fall to earth now on broken wings. Their agents and praetorians on Wall Street are working feverishly to stave off that crash landing, like a band of magicians casting spells on the ground, while that big hunk of juddering metal augurs earthward. Wait for it as spring brings new life across the land and things unseen before they steal onto the scene. Oh, talking of Boeing and the new normal, the Daily Mail reports the coronavirus pandemic could kill off large, long-haul planes as the airline industry continues to be crippled by the worldwide lockdown. An expert warned today airlines are expected to switch to flying fewer, smaller aircraft, with the infection said to have accelerated the demise of the world's largest passenger planes. These are the relatively new Airbus A380 and the Boeing 747-400. The original jumbo jet with Lufthansa already scrapping half of its versions of both models. Aviation consultant Andrew Charlton told The Guardian, "You will never see a 747 flying again, and the only A380s will have Emirates painted on the side." The German carrier expects it will take several months for travel restrictions to be completely lifted and years until the global demand returns to pre-crisis levels. Airbus A380 planes cost £350 million each, and there are 110 in service. Meanwhile, the Boeing 747 comes in at about £190 million per plane, with 356 in service. I don't know, the Boeing 747 has to be the most successful passenger plane in history, and what, they're going to junk it? I don't know. This is all based on the assumption, of course, that this panic is going to continue indefinitely, that there is going to be a new normal. I suppose it's entirely possible that with everyone being much poorer in the future, well, not everyone, I think the 1% is going to do just fine, that people are less likely to fly because they can't afford it. And also, as I mentioned weeks ago, that airline travel has been made such a grossly unpleasant experience. It is intensely wearying to spend money and then go to a place to be processed and be treated like a criminal every step of the way. So maybe that's the reason why airline travel is never going to come back. Let's go to the chat. Metal Mike says, Event 201 called it CAPS, Coronavirus-Associated Pulmonary Syndrome. Yeah, Bill Gates. He missed it on the internet, but he seems to have been quite prophetic about coronavirus. Mr. Dalmatia says, Gates's voice personifies Anglo-cockery, if I've ever seen one. Are they claiming Event 201 never happened, says Metal Mike? Well, the website is still up there. Half Galician says the New England Journal of Medicine is a hyper-political, equity, trans publication in the essay and policy sections. Oh, yeah, I don't really have any strong positions on vaccination, except that I've read Peter Hitchens on this subject, and we saw Tony Blair being very coy on whether his own children were getting these vaccinations, and there are certainly difficulties associated with them. Some people claim that they're responsible for the tremendous increase in autistic children. But what's curious to me is the reaction to this, the skepticism about vaccines. Now, it's always been known that vaccines have contraindications, but the medical community has become absolutely hysterical about any people who question any vaccine. Mr. Dalmatia says, KMG, looking spiffy, nice suit. Well, it's just a sports jacket. I'm wearing what they used to call chinos from Eddie Bauer. Apparently, the pants are expensive, but they last a very long time. Maybe we'll go back to that kind of shopping, that people will save up for clothes that actually last instead of going to Walmart and buy a whole bunch of stuff that start coming apart in the washer during the third wash. Coachilango says, let's just retroactively enforce all the speeding tickets against Gates. Could put him away for years at 6 months a pop. I didn't know that he was particularly renowned for this. Again, if I had Gates's money, or just a small fraction of it, I would hire a driver/minder, so I wouldn't have to do all that and to keep me out of trouble. YT says, I'm telling on Kevin for not wearing a mask. I do see a fair amount of people wearing masks on the streets now, which are, well, not quite totally deserted. But yeah, I don't. Everyone's been exposed. Everyone has been exposed. As Christopher Ferrara said in his lengthy essay that I read from a few days ago, the social distancing, which the elite is congratulating itself for, has so many holes in it that it's effectively useless. That everyone has been exposed. But we're all going to pretend that that is not the case. And, oh, we don't need to test all these people. And it's not possible to test people. I'm really coming to the conclusion here that they don't want widespread testing, widespread random testing, because it's going to tell us that COVID-19 is really a little different in terms of its death rate than common influenza. John Miller says there's no way the DNC benches Biden. I'm going to be talking about Joe in a little while. Josh Randall listens to Beck's first album, realizes he was way ahead of his time. I like Beck very much, from the beginning to the current day. Age of the Rising Leo says, is this whole Boogaloo thing a call to arms, or is the media trying to perpetuate extremist propaganda? No, I think one of the things the media is trying to do is to perpetuate its own existence, because they're the people giving you the truth as opposed to the misinformation. We need the media now more than ever. Josh Randall, Doolittle versus Surfer Rosa. Doolittle is my favorite. I mean, I like Surfer Rosa, but Doolittle is my favorite. Mellow Gold is nothing close to the first album. Yeah, Odelay was a breakthrough. I don't think there's any question about that. So yeah, let's talk about the lockdown. This is from Spiked and from Dr. John A. Lee, and let's find out his. Let's find out what he has to say. The UK government has extended its lockdown for another 3 weeks, but could the shutdown of society be doing more harm than good? In fact, is there any evidence of it doing any good at all? Dr. John A. Lee, a recently retired professor of pathology and National Health Service consultant pathologist, has repeatedly called for a critical and dispassionate examination of the evidence in relation to COVID-19, raising questions about the government and its advisors' interpretation of the data. So he's asked, you have been a relatively lone voice in questioning mainstream assumptions. Why have you found it important to speak out? As a doctor and scientist my entire life, I believe that medicine and science have improved life immeasurably over the past 200 years, and especially over the last 50 years. But the particular mix of science, medicine, and politics that we're seeing now, I am not absolutely sure that is the case. What problems do you see in the way figures are currently being recorded and reported? The figures are just so unreliable. It's very difficult to understand when you are looking at figures from different countries and figures in isolation about things like death, what they really mean. And obviously, if we can't understand what the figures mean, it's quite difficult to then know what we should do about them. These figures are then fed into models of the disease and the epidemic, which are being used to influence and inform public policy. But those models are only as good as their input data and the assumptions they make. And there are so many unknowns, which means the model's outputs are really quite questionable. And given that we have now got ourselves into this situation for a variety of reasons, getting ourselves out of it using the same models and predictions is even more questionable. For example, we are currently in lockdown for two reasons. One is that the initial figures suggested that we were dealing with a very highly virulent disease. The WHO initially suggested that the case fatality rate would be 3.4%. This is a very high number, which would have caused a huge number of deaths. But as we have had gradually more and more data coming in, those percentages have been falling. In many cases, more complete data are now suggesting case fatality rates of 0.4%. My guess is that it will end up between 0.5 and 0.1%, which was pretty much exactly what I said yesterday, and probably nearer to the lower end of that. So if the disease isn't as virulent as was originally thought, the number of deaths will be correspondingly lower. The second reason that we were put into lockdown is that it was assumed that this new virus was going to rip through the population and a very high percentage of people were going to be infected quickly. This would cause a big surge or peak of cases which healthcare systems wouldn't be able to deal with. The lockdown is supposed to reduce that peak to enable health systems to cope with it. We had various pictures from Italy, Spain, New York, and other places showing that health systems weren't able to cope. But of course, in lots of other places, health systems have been able to cope with it. The real point is that there isn't any direct evidence that what we are doing is actually affecting the peak. It is possible to make arguments that sound reasonable that a lockdown should affect the peak, and yet other places which are doing different things seem to have similarly shaped graphs. It is only an assumption that the lockdown is having a big effect on the virus spread, but this is not a known scientific fact. As far as I can see, Sweden, despite not having anything near as severe a lockdown as Britain has had, actually has a very similar curve to ours. And Sweden's death rate per 100,000 people is roughly half of ours at the moment. So it is not a given that what we are doing is either working or is having all the right effects. I'll just interrupt to say that as far as Sweden goes, I'm just going to make an assumption that the Swedish people as a whole are very much healthier than the British people. Don't get me wrong, Dr. Lee says it's clearly a nasty disease, but it is not as nasty as it was originally thought. Unfortunately, the media have tended to reinforce the initial ideas about what this disease was like, which have not necessarily been borne out by the numbers since then. We can reasonably question the assumptions of the models, for example. The accuracy of the models and their predictions of how many people will be infected and die depend on things like the transmissibility of the virus. But that isn't something we know very accurately at the moment. It also depends on population susceptibility. The UK models, as I understand it, said that 60 to 80% of the population would be infected by the virus in a short period of time. Whereas, in fact, some of the evidence from enclosed populations, such as the Diamond Princess cruise ship, suggests that only 15% of the population might be susceptible. Maybe that is because the virus spreads in a different way than we thought. Maybe some people actually have immunity based on other coronaviruses that are already out there in the population. Now, if you look at a cruise ship, one would think that exposure to the virus would be 100%, or very close to 100%, because of the nature of life on cruise ships. So 15% came down. 100% exposed to COVID-19, or the coronavirus, 15% getting COVID-19. Again, this suggests very strongly that this disease is nowhere near as virulent as been suggested. Lee says, in the plague that spread through Europe in the 14th century, it is reckoned that maybe 1 in 3 people died. Obviously, if we were facing something like that, it would be reasonable to take very extreme measures. But this is a disease that is going to kill 0.3, 0.2, or 0.1% of people that it infects, and it may only infect a relatively small proportion of the population. We just don't know. Again, I suppose the question is, qui bono? Who benefits? Well, Wall Street has benefited greatly, and Bill Gates has benefited, and I think that the Democrats think that they have benefited. They're clearly using this to bring down Trump. It's a piece from Spectator USA. Another day and yet more evidence has appeared that would indicate that the number of people who have been infected with SARS-CoV-2 might be vastly higher than official figures suggest. This time, a Californian study suggests the figure in one county could be more than 50 times the number who knew they have had the virus. A team from Stanford University and other colleges recruited volunteers in Santa Clara County via Facebook adverts and produced a sample of 3,000 representatives of the county as a whole. They were then invited for blood tests to detect the presence of antibodies to the virus. The result was positive in 1.5% of cases. Adjusting for age, gender, and ethnicity, the results suggest that 2.8 of the people in the county had already had the virus. That might not seem many, but at the time of the study, on April 4th and 5th, only 1,094 people in the county were recorded as having the virus. The study suggests the real figure is between 48,000 and 81,000. So expect an effort to suppress this information. Agence France Presse says recovery from coronavirus may not confer immunity. We're all going to die. A curious piece from the CBC. Curious because it's not parroting the Trudeau line. Will it really take weeks to ease physical distancing? Maybe not. How much longer? That's the visceral plea from Canadians who've been stuck at home for more than a month, many trapped in private purgatory. Some are stranded with abusive family members. Others are watching their family businesses deteriorate. There are people grappling with mental illness, chronic disease, addiction, and loneliness. It's an entire nation with noses pressed up against the window, staring out at the blossoming spring just out of reach. And Kelly Crow interviews a bunch of people to suggest that, it doesn't have to take that long. But I guess this is up to the premiers and Justin Trudeau. And for now, they have all decided that they're going to be scaredy cats. And Trudeau has said that we're going to have to wait for the vaccine, which could take a very long time indeed. From the Telegraph, ministers warn cancer treatment juddering to a halt amid coronavirus crisis. Again, the panic is going to kill more people than COVID-19. And I hope the people responsible for this are held responsible and punished for it. Oh, let's get to Donald Trump. Trump trolls Cuomo during press conference, suggesting tweets get the job done. It's from the New York Post. Governor Cuomo should spend more time doing and less time complaining. Get out there and get the job done. Stop talking, Trump wrote during Cuomo's televised coronavirus address, which appeared to be watching and live tweeting from the White House. Trump's social media response came after Cuomo told reporters the federal government needed to help states with coronavirus testing, saying the administration cannot wipe their hands of this and say the states are responsible. Trump accused Cuomo of being ungrateful for the resources given to the hard-hit Empire State, which include the USNS Comfort, the FEMA-assembled hospital at the Javits Center, with my understanding which is empty, and thousands of ventilators. We built you thousands of hospital beds that you didn't need or use, gave large numbers of ventilators that you should have had, and helped you with testing that you should be doing. We have given New York far more money, health, and equipment than any other state by far, and these great men and women who did the job never hear you say thanks, your numbers are not good, less talk, and more action. Cuomo responded, if he's sitting home watching TV, maybe he should get up and go to work, the governor said, adding that he had already thanked Trump that countless times. What am I supposed to do? Send a bouquet of flowers? I said, thank you, thank you, thank you. Cuomo, getting pretty big for his boots, the Love Gov is. This is from the Christian Post. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo said Monday that people, not God, are responsible for the fact that COVID-19 cases in his state have plateaued. Cuomo, a Catholic Democrat, he's not much of a Catholic, seriously. I mean, if he lived in a diocese that took Catholicism seriously, he would have been barred from the sacraments, from communion, certainly. It's a good thing to identify in a place like New York. It's a good thing to identify as Catholic. To actually hold political positions which are true to a traditional Catholicism, I suppose, would not be good. This is actually what he said about bringing the numbers down. God did not do that. Faith did not do that. Destiny did not do that. A lot of pain and suffering did that. Yes, people did it. Yes, call him Ozymandias. Look on his works and despair. From the Mail, President Trump made himself the star of the lockdown rebellion on Friday by tweeting, "Liberate Minnesota," and then "Liberate Michigan" and "Liberate Virginia." The tweets came one day after the president's coronavirus task force rolled out guidelines that would give governors broad power to decide when states' economies would open back up amid the coronavirus pandemic. But governors, including Michigan's Gretchen Whitmer, have attracted protests from constituents complaining that the stay-at-home orders to prevent the spread of the deadly virus have trampled on their liberty. It was pointed out to me yesterday that I have not made fun of Gretchen Whitmer's Christian name, and I responded to Matt Vey that I was holding that in reserve. Someone else commented that a gentleman doesn't do that. I may still, I'm not above that kind of thing, mocking people for their names. In fact, I do an awful lot of that, to be honest. What else do we have here? Donald Trump launches new attack on the World Health Organization, accusing it of ignoring Taiwanese email alerting to possible human-to-human transmission, then being inaccurate and misleading as the virus spread. Trump used the words of the Hudson Institution's Lanhee Chen, who wrote an op-ed discussing the rift between Taiwan and the WHO. Taiwan, which is not a member of the WHO, is accusing it of ignoring an email alerting the organization of human-to-human coronavirus transmission. Now, we may be seeing the battle lines being drawn up here for the election in November, and I suppose for the next Canadian election, which could happen at any time because Trudeau does not have a majority government. That Trump is very much on the anti-China side, and the Democrats are very much on the pro-China side, which strikes me as being a misjudgment. Similarly, in Canada, the Conservative Party, which is the official opposition, is now very much on the anti-China side, and the Liberal government is very much on the pro-China side, with Canada's Health Minister, Patty, not Patricia, not Pat, but Patty Hajdu, said that any criticism of the WHO and its initial response to this was a conspiracy theory. President Trump accuses New York City of inflating its coronavirus death toll from CBS News. They did. This is a fact. It's not a claim. It's not an opinion. President Trump suggested Wednesday that New York City is artificially inflating its coronavirus death toll after a revised count added more than 3,700 fatalities to the city's tally. His accusation drew disgust from the mayor's office, which reminded the president that he's talking about human beings with grieving families, and bewilderment from New York's governor. I see this morning where New York added 3,000 deaths because they died. Rather than heart attack, they say heart attack caused by this. If you look at it, that's it. Everything we have is documented and reported. Great. What they are doing is just in case. That's okay. We have more cases because we do more reporting. A spokeswoman for de Blasio said the allegation insulted the lives lost. These were people with names, hobbies, lives, hobbies. They leave behind grieving loved ones. They deserve to be recognized, not minimized. Oh, so there's apparently two classes of newly dead people in New York. There's the nobodies, those people that didn't die of COVID-19. And then there's the superstars, the people who died with COVID-19. Now, keep in mind, they weren't even tested for it, but some bureaucrats decided that they were feeling really generous, and they decided to add almost 3,800 names to the golden list of the superstar nearly dead in New York City. What a nice thing for them to have done. Oh, Dr. Fauci says we are not going back to normal soon. Whew. That's a relief because, I was thinking all of the turmoil, which has affected me personally, rather significantly. Yeah, I wouldn't want all the turmoil and uncertainty to come to an end because, I thrive on the prospect of everything falling apart. Jobs, we don't need no stinking jobs. We have the government to send us checks. But where's the government going to get the money to send people checks if no one's working? I don't know. You sound like a virus denier to me. I think you're going to have to be checked out. I don't think we're going to give you one of those passes that allows you to leave your house. Fauci said, no matter what phase you're in, there are certain fundamental things that we've done that are not like it was in September, October. You want to call it the new normal. You can call it whatever you want, he said at the White House Thursday. Even when states or counties get to phase 3, which gives Americans the most freedom to move, vulnerable individuals are advised to practice physical distancing, and bars are cautioned to operate with increased standing room. How are people going to get picked up at bars if social distancing is maintained? Fauci was asked specifically about packed sports arenas and concerts, and if in phase 3 Americans would be able to attend large-scale gatherings. The answer is conceivable that we will be able to do that, Fauci said. I think there will always have to be attention to making sure we don't do all that packing in together. Well, you know, even if you go to like a leader recital or a chamber music concert, many of these take place in theaters of a couple of hundred. But if you're going to maintain this 6 foot or 2 meter distancing, then, I mean, you can do the math yourself. Instead of having 200 people in a room, what are you going to have, 30? So that means that such concerts are no longer going to be possible. It also means if you look at churches, I attend, or used to attend, because it used to be open, St. Anthony's Cathedral in downtown Victoria, and on Sunday mornings, well, it's packed. There are thousands of people in there. If you're going to open it again and you're going to maintain this 2 meter rule, I suppose, again, it means that what are we looking at? 70, 80% of the people who would be there can't be there because they won't be allowed to be there. Let's talk about Joe Biden. Let's talk about Joe Biden. Joe Biden has got to the point where you just have to print what he said. That's sufficient. There's he was live on CNN with Anderson Cooper, the gay robot, and Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who I believe is a neurologist or a neurological surgeon, and his face is absolutely priceless. They've got all three of them on camera, different cameras, and he looks, well, best word, bemused. Here's what he said. There's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that, was totally different than he called it, the World War II. He had the War Production Board. During the same appearance, he seemed to have difficulty recalling 2001, the year of the terrorist attacks on New York City, the Pentagon, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. You have an entire generation of young people beginning back in 2000, when the attack occurred on 9/11, that in fact have been behind the 8 ball from the time that they got out of school. And yes, he called the virus COVID-9. Look, he's a wreck. And it's not as if he's going to get any better. They got his wife there, Dr. Joe Biden. She's not a doctor. I suppose, so what, there's some sort of continuity that he doesn't think that he's in a void somewhere, where he's floated off into space. He's reading from notes, and he can't read a single sentence. Also, he's had so much plastic surgery on his face that he looks like the Joker, but the Democrats, at least in public, seem to be confident, that he's going to make short work of Trump during the election. Okay, the Daily Mail has decided that it is going to be the newspaper, but the world newspaper of panic. I suppose panic sells more papers or results in more clicks. Is Europe coronavirus death toll double the official figures? Belgium's death rate soars above Spain and France after including fatalities in care homes and suspected cases. It's as, it reminds me of an old joke. Forgive me if you heard it before. An Englishman, a Scotsman, and an Irishman are thrown out of an airplane. Who hits the ground first? The Irishman, because he thought it was a race. Ooh, yeah, go Belgium, go Spain. Got to get those numbers up there by any means possible. There's all sorts of ways in which people are going to die when they wouldn't have otherwise because of this panic. Another story from the Mail, domestic abuse reports to Crime Stoppers surge by nearly 50% during lockdown as charity urges people to come forward if they think they know a victim. Yes, you have a whole bunch of people locked up with no work, with no indication of when this is going to come to an end. So yes, also, people are drinking more than they were previously, and I suspect that, certainly Seth Rogen said that he's smoking ungodly amounts of pot, and I suspect he's not the only one, and there are other drugs involved, not necessarily for Seth Rogen, but for others. From 1010 Wins Radio, man tells NYPD he killed his dad while together in quarantine. Cops find mutilated body inside home. I suspect that quite a few bodies are going to be found in these homes if and when the quarantine finally ends. From the Dallas Morning News, Texas Governor Greg Abbott says schools to remain closed for rest of academic year, but eases some coronavirus restrictions. How important is schooling, by the way? If it can just be suspended for several months, doesn't that suggest that the authorities don't really think that schooling is all that important? So, the most infuriating story of the day from KCAL or KCAL in CBS affiliate in Los Angeles. From a popular skate park in San Clemente was filled with sand to discourage skaters from using it during the coronavirus pandemic and to promote social distancing. San Clemente had shut down all its parks and facilities on April the 1st under the state's stay-at-home orders, but skaters ignored signs warning against trespassing at the Ralph's skate court. Since park facilities have been closed, city officials say they routinely saw people visit the skate park. Boo! Even by some children accompanied with their parents. City officials told the newspapers they followed in the footsteps of other cities and filled the skate park with 37 tons of sand. The nonprofit group that has raised money to support the skate park, however, says the city made the decision to do this without notifying them first. Let's see. Boomer says, that is funny. The supporters felt they should have been notified. They were notified, all right. They were notified to stay out. I don't know. Maybe America's young people, the young people of the West, are being radicalized by this, because there are lots of older people, I suppose, especially amongst the boomers, that don't understand that the elite hates their guts. And I think that the younger people, they're getting an early introduction to this, which can only be a good thing. Again, what has happened to the Australians? From Reuters, Australian public life could be constrained for another year because of the coronavirus. Prime Minister Scott Morrison warned on Friday as the country's most populous state mulled sending children to school in shifts. Restaurants, bars, and other non-essential businesses have closed, and public gatherings of more than 2 people are banned under the threat of fines and even prison measures that are expected to double the unemployment rate by mid-year. In response, the daily growth rate of reported new infections has steadied in the low percentage single digits from about 25% several weeks ago, for a total of about 6,500 infections, including 63 deaths. There is no correlation that can be proved between these two things. None whatsoever. Morrison said some measures, like the rule requiring people to stand at least 1.5 meters apart, why not 2, would likely remain for several months, given that there was no guarantee a vaccine would be developed in that time. Yeah. Again, I think we're looking at possibly pre-revolutionary situations here. Oh, and in more Australian news, Prime Minister Scott Morrison hints that a tracing app could be compulsory for all Australians if fewer than 40% download it voluntarily. Mobile phone tracking software could be compulsory if not enough Australians voluntarily download it. My preference is to give Australians a go at getting it right. That's my plan A, and I really want plan A to work, he told Triple M. He has likened using the tracing app to national service, or I don't know, perhaps to indentured servitude or slavery. I know this would be something they might not normally do at an ordinary time, but this is not an ordinary time. Yes, because we're looking at a disease which is likely to kill 0.1 to 0.5% of the people who get it, and the vast majority of these people are just the sort of people who would be struck down by any normal influenza. Again, at the nursing home in North Vancouver, which is responsible for, I don't know, 1/3 to 1/4 of all the deaths in my province. The average age there is 87. I'm reminded that voting in elections is mandatory in Australia. So Australia is not the beacon of freedom that many people believe it to be. Morrison says the app won't be used by police as evidence to prosecute people for breaching social distancing requirements. I don't believe him. Labor leader Anthony Albanese, who found out about the app in the newspaper, is concerned about the prospect of forcibly being tracked. One of the things that would occur if that was the government response would be people would simply stop taking their phone to places. Well, yeah. It's a curious situation, and the same thing seems to be happening in Britain, where the Labour Party is speaking for human liberties, and the so-called right-wing parties are saying, no, there's no more human liberties. We will decide. You don't have any basic rights, rights of Englishmen. No, that's all over now. We will decide what you are allowed to do for the foreseeable future, and you should be bloody grateful we let you do anything. EU and Australian tracing apps ready in weeks. Woohoo! Germany's health minister, Jens Spahn, said his country's app would be ready to download in 3 to 4 weeks. Australia and Denmark plan to push out apps within 2 weeks. Contact tracing apps are being developed by several countries around the world. They typically use Bluetooth or satellite location data to record a person who has been in close proximity to. That information can then be used to notify app users if someone they have met becomes ill with COVID-19 and declares their status in the app. But such tracking technology has raised concerns that it could be misused for mass surveillance. How could anyone come to that conclusion, given the large proportion of the population who must install it for it to work effectively? Australia's rapid development is partly down to basing it on an existing app called Trace Together, which has already been deployed in Singapore. Yeah, that's the model, Singapore, which is very close to being a totalitarian state. Okay. From the Lockdown Skeptics page of Toby Young. All the broadsheets lead this morning with yesterday's announcement from Dominic Raab that the lockdown will be extended for at least another 3 weeks and in all likelihood will last for 3 months from the date it was first imposed, March 23rd, which takes us into June. And he came up with 5 tests that have to be met before the lockdown will be lifted. And Toby Young points out that the first thing to be said about these 5 tests is that the first, third, fourth, and fifth all relate to the capacity of the NHS and its suppliers and could have been combined into a single test. Only the second is non-NHS related. And they're giving themselves plenty of wiggle room there to extend this definitely. As far as assessing the capacity of the NHS, it would be helpful to know if the government is still using the March 16th Imperial College model, which assumed the NHS's ICU capacity would remain constant throughout the lockdown. But of course, that is not the case. Last weekend, we learned that 37,500 general acute hospital beds were unoccupied. That's a lot of beds, with only 19 patients being treated at the new 4,000 capacity Nightingale Hospital in the XL. And at least one of these new Nightingales won't be needed. Panic, 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 panic everywhere. Now, as I was discussing yesterday, as William Briggs pointed out, the Imperial College models called for a preposterous number of dead in both Britain and the United States, worse than the Spanish flu. That is clearly not going to happen, even with deaths being faked officially. So why is anyone taking Imperial College seriously anymore? More panic from the Daily Mail. Britain suffers another 847 coronavirus deaths, taking total to 14,576 cases. As a former WHO official warns, there could be 40,000 lives lost in the first outbreak. They're going to have to fake a lot of deaths to bring it up to 40,000 before UK is hit to up to 10 waves of the infection. Oh, it just keeps coming and coming and coming. It reminds me of, what's that guy's name? Bill Pullman? Or was the other Bill? You're from Aliens? Game over, man. Game over. Coronavirus vaccine will take many months, and there are no guarantees. Alok Sharma admits as number 10 announces first trials will begin next week after hopes it could be ready by September. Yeah, if this virus, gets put off, the vaccine gets put off long enough, then the lockdown and all the rest of it can be extended indefinitely. And I'm beginning to think that that is the plan. So why are only half of the UK's coronavirus tests being used? Government claims it has daily capacity to swab 38,000, but only 21,000 checks have been carried because of a low demand. And again, I'm going to suggest the governments and the elite do not want widespread testing, particularly widespread random testing, because it would prove that everyone's been exposed to the coronavirus. Oh, yes, let's all clap. Let's bang some pots for the frontline workers and for the police who've been so diligent in harassing people walking or sitting on benches or laying down in the grass because it's a warm, sunny day. The Metropolitan Police of London, their chief is a lesbian dwarf called Cressida Dick. That's seriously her name. She has been involved in so many scandals. Why is she still chief commissioner? Well, because she's a lesbian dwarf. That's the reason why. The leader of London's police force, again according to the Mail, was slammed today for joining hundreds of people ignoring social distancing rules last night while clapping for the NHS. The busy crowd gathered on Westminster Bridge at 8 p.m. under the noses of police officers, including Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick. Critics on Twitter have called Dick the worst commissioner of all time after the failed photo opportunity became a public embarrassment. Police had planned the event to showcase support for key workers, turning their cars' blue lights on, but the applause resulted in overcrowding. Junior Dr. Ademir Rafi captured the sickening moment in a Twitter video that has been watched more than 10 million times and caused outrage on social media. Dr. Rafi, who works at St. Thomas's Hospital, said, "I'm a doctor working at the hospital that's right there. And yes, I was also somewhat perplexed by the lack of social distancing." They don't believe it, okay? They don't believe that social distancing has any effect. It is simply an excuse to make people jump through hoops. Jump. Come on, jump. Jump higher. Keep jumping. Keep jumping until I say stop, and I'm not tired of this. Do not book your summer holidays. Ministers warn public not to make any getaway plans. Yeah, we're not. There's no escape. No escape. How many elderly Britons in care homes have really been infected with coronavirus? Poll of care workers claims figure is around 40%, despite number 10's insistence that it is just 15. Once again, we have the figures from the Diamond Princess cruise ship. And again, if the numbers are as high as the care workers say, then the panic is completely unjustified. So the numbers must be kept down. Some numbers are being kept down, and some numbers are being juiced up. So what are the numbers, the official numbers in my country of Canada? As of 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we have, hang on, just let me get the text here, 31,872 in Canada and 1,309 deaths. Again, there are 38 million people in Canada. Prince Edward Island, 0 deaths. Newfoundland, 3 deaths. Nova Scotia, 4 deaths. New Brunswick, 0 deaths. How could there, okay, Manitoba, 5 deaths. Saskatchewan, 4 deaths. How could there be any possible reason for all of these provinces being locked down, which they are locked down? British Columbia has 1,575 cases and 77 deaths. And again, there are 5.1 million people in my province of British Columbia. Today, Dr. Bonnie Henry, who of course has been immortalized in public art, announced 43 new cases of COVID-19, no new deaths. Does that count as, flattening? Anything? Is there any flattening here? Okay, so what's the situation on Vancouver Island where I live, which is locked down, they stopped reporting the numbers they stopped giving the regional outbreaks, it would appear. And I think they're not doing the regional outbreaks because the numbers are they're just too low. They're just too low. Maybe in this story, maybe it gives the regional numbers. Because last I checked, there were about 80 cases on the whole of Vancouver Island. Nope, they appear to have stopped giving the regional numbers. I guess because it's too embarrassing. If you've got 80 cases and 2 deaths, why would you lock down a whole island, especially since it's an island? But no, that's the matriarchal rule. How come they're not doing it? Everyone else has to do it, and they don't have to do it. Well, we'll make them do it just to make you feel better. And yes, I do feel better now. There's something in me that, other people being punished. You like to see other people being punished, even when it's unnecessary, so long as everything is equal. Chantal Hebert, who writes for the Toronto Star and regularly appears on television as a pundit, is the closest thing to the received wisdom, political wisdom in Canada. Andrew Scheer's tone-deaf response to COVID-19 is bad news for the next Conservative leader. There's no mention that Andrew Scheer's intervention stopped a sort of dictatorial takeover by Justin Trudeau, although we don't need to get parliamentary approval for any spending, for the next year and a half. Nah. Scheer intervened and stopped that. And Scheer has, he's made it clear that he is against China in this, and that doesn't seem to make it into her story. No, it does not. So apparently, Andrew Scheer is bad news for the Conservative Party because he is not lolling around, like a dog at Trudeau's feet, thanking him for whatever he has done that supposedly has saved Canada. Oh, here's a typically Canadian story. Migrant and undocumented workers plead for help during COVID-19. It's from the National Observer. Illegal immigrants. Oh, won't somebody think of the illegal immigrants? And what? Finally, from Canada, we have a national holiday, which is on July the 1st. And it commemorates 1867, July 1st, 1867, when Canada was given Dominion status within the British Empire. And it was called, what, until 1980 or so, it was called Dominion Day, appropriately. But you see, the talk of the Dominion, the British Empire, apparently this annoys people in Quebec. So we got to get rid of that. Just like in 1965, our beautiful old flag was replaced with our sad generic flag. Oh, the old flag had a Christian cross on it. Can't have that. This one has a maple leaf, one maple leaf. So we'll worship a maple leaf now. There were just, what, a couple of dozen people in the House of Commons, and it was late at night, and there was a, we're going to have a vote on changing the name of the national holiday from Canada, Dominion Day to Canada Day. That sounds really inspiring, doesn't it? Our generic national holiday day, as I like to call it. And from the CBC, get ready for a virtual Canada Day party this year, which is entirely appropriate because Canada is a virtual country. Canadian Heritage Minister Stephen Guilbeault said his department is working with artists to create a virtual show on July the 1st. Together in a virtual environment, we will celebrate our strength and resilience. Strength and resilience are things that are not normally associated with cowering inside your homes. Let's take a quick look at the chat before I move on to the book club. Donald Robertson says, the problem is lying, suppression of truth, and bad governance, nothing else. Don from Beyond says, except for the Satanists running things behind the scenes. Manfred von Thistlebaum says, anybody see the vanishing Pope? Well, a few days ago, he was touting UBI, Universal Basic Income. Ashley Bravo says, are there any places that have good takeout bat soup? Asking for a friend. Don from Beyond, are all Chinese restaurants closed down? They are in my area, and they are in my area as well. Donald Robertson says, all the island needs to do is control entry to the island. Well, apparently, all non-essential travel is not allowed on BC ferries, which is the means by which the vast majority of people go back and forth between the island and the mainland. And the number of sailings has been drastically curtailed. Le Comte de Boreas says, Sweden has a minuscule death rate comparison to Italy. Isn't it amazing? Ashley Bravo, is Canada divided between French and Anglo among the descendants of Western Europeans? Well, very much so. That Quebec is dominated by the Francophones, although they are being replaced rather quickly by third world immigrants. Northern New Brunswick is largely Quebecois, and there are a few pockets of Eastern Ontario, which are Quebecois, but then there are large pockets of Quebec, which are English-speaking. Nevertheless, there is this ridiculous national myth that we are forced to subscribe to, that Canada is a bilingual, bicultural country. There is French on our cornflakes. Infamously, there is French on everything. Everything that is sold in this country must have French on it, even though in most of Canada, there are no French-speaking people. They even have their own school districts in Alberta. And I suspect it's like French immersion. This is a way to separate one's children from the herd. The book I am talking about today is from 1993. It is by Walker Percy, and it is called Lost in the Cosmos, the Last Self-Help Book. Walker Percy is the second Southern novelist that I've had on the book club, although this is not a novel. The first was Flannery O'Connor. Walker Percy lived from 1916 to 1990. Now, interestingly, I suppose it would be easy to pass off this book and its criticism of science and the veneration of science as being, the jealous musings of a humanist who knows nothing about it. Well, Walker Percy was trained as a scientist. He majored in chemistry at UNC Chapel Hill and later received a MD from Columbia University and was later a lecturer in pathology at Columbia University. So this was not an anti-scientific man, certainly not a man ignorant of science. Walker Percy, there's a lot of talk about suicide in Lost in the Cosmos, and I suppose this is a congenital because Walker Percy's mother, father, and one of his grandfathers all committed suicide. Percy was born in, Birmingham. He lived around the South in various places. He spent the last few years of his life living in Louisiana. I suppose, he's a Southern writer, but not one of those Southern Gothic writers. He goes into the plight of the Southern writer at great length in Lost in the Cosmos, particularly William Faulkner. When he was a young man, his friend, the writer Shelby Foote, they made a pilgrimage to see William Faulkner in Oxford, Mississippi, and Percy was so awestruck that he wouldn't leave the car. He talks about William Faulkner, that Faulkner returned to home and he would go to the local drugstore and hang out there with the folks, but he didn't spend very much time there. This was what Percy called a re-entry attempt. That is the nature of artists' lives, that they become alienated from the world, and they make various attempts to re-entry. One of them is by going home. Another one is by traveling the world. And there is drug and drinks. There is sexual license and perversion. There is the path to the East, Buddhism and such like, and there is a suicide. A great many writers are drunks, and a great many writers have been suicides. So Walker Percy stopped the profession of medicine. As I said, he worked in pathology, and he contracted tuberculosis from a corpse. And he was forced to spend, several years in sanatoriums recovering from TB, where he read an awful lot. He read a lot of Soren Kierkegaard, to give one example, and there is much talk of Kierkegaard in Lost in the Cosmos, particularly Kierkegaard's view on Eros. His first novel, The Moviegoer, won the National Book Award. Percy was a very highly regarded author. He was published by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. I suppose, I don't know if there's any cachet associated with book publishers nowadays. But there was certainly a cachet associated with FSG. His novels are The Moviegoer, The Last Gentleman, Love in the Ruins, Lancelot, The Second Coming, and The Thanatos Syndrome. Percy developed a great interest in semiology, which is the study of signs, and became something of an authority on the matter. And semiology is at the heart of Lost in the Cosmos. That semiology is used to prove that man is a creature unlike any other creature or anything else that exists in the universe, in the cosmos. The starting point of this book, or I suppose the planted axiom of this book, is that society, well, at least Western society, has become deranged. And I want to read a lengthy passage from near the end of the book, which gives you an indication of the type of thinking that led to Percy writing this book. The sex and violence in Western life, especially American life, are commonplaces. But the important questions do not have commonplace answers. For example, what is the relation between the two? Are they merely, as one so often hears, the paired symptoms of a decaying society like the 5th century Roman Empire? Or is there a reciprocal relationship? That is to say, is a thoroughly eroticized society less violent and a thoroughly violent society less erotic? Or the more ominous question, suppose the erotic is the last and best recourse of the stranded self, and suppose then that, through the sexual revolution, recreational sex becomes available to all ages and all classes. What if then even the erotic becomes devalued? What if it happens, as Paul Ricoeur put it, that at the same time that sexuality becomes insignificant, it becomes more imperative as a response to the disappointments experienced in other sectors of human life? What then? Does the self simply diminish, subside into apathy like laboratory animals deprived of sensory stimulation? Or does the demoniac spirit of the self, that's a term from Kierkegaard, frustrated by the failure of Eros, turn in the end to the cold fury of Saturn? It is no longer open to Clint Eastwood to do what Cary Grant did. In fact, Eastwood's character, Dirty Harry, doesn't like girls, but he has his .44 Magnum. Will the bumper stickers of the 1990s read, "Make love, not war," or "Love is gone, but war remains"? Hold on, says the reader. Just a minute. Yes? Are there not plenty of good people left? Decent folk who have no truck with what you call the spirit of the erotic and the spirit of violence? Millions of people, in fact, such as those described by Charles Kuralt on the road in America, who are, without exception, good, kind, neighborly, generous, patriotic folk? I'm willing to believe it, but where do all the child molesters come from? Look out for benign types like Charlie Kuralt. And are there not millions of ordinary American families with hardworking, devoted husbands, loving wives, good kids, who live happy lives, have a good time without promiscuous sex, drugs, or violence, and on the whole turn out well? Undoubtedly. In fact, I'm amazed at how extraordinarily nice most young people are, extraordinarily nice and extraordinarily ignorant. And don't some people fall in love with their heart's desire, marry, and live reasonably happy lives? Some, for a while, maybe, I can't say. Don't you believe in love? Yes, but the word has been polluted. Beware of people who go around talking about loving and caring. And are there not plenty of sincerely religious folk left, Christians and Jews, whose lives are filled with the joy of the love of God and who go about doing good? Perhaps. Some, I suppose. And are there still not religious folk, women who give their very lives to serve God and their fellow man, all for the love of God? Well, some. Though for every Mother Teresa, there seem to be 1,800 nutty American nuns, female Clint Eastwoods, who have it in for men and are out to get the Pope. Then what you are saying beyond the commonplace, that there are now, just as there have always been, good people and bad people, or if you prefer, people with traditional value systems and people with new lifestyles, I'm only trying to make sense of a peculiar phenomenon, hardly to be ignored. The sudden and unprecedented appearance of florid sexual behavior and the overt and covert practice of violence to the point of rendering cities unlivable, of nice people like Europeans and Americans killing each other by the millions, and with it, the very real possibility for the first time in history that we may destroy ourselves in the near future. Decency is as may be, but decent or not, the autonomous self is devolving upon what seems to it a simple and reasonable view of sexuality. In view of its low cost and availability, the easy prevention of disease and pregnancy, could anything seem more reasonable than that the traditional Judeo-Christian strictures against premarital and extramarital sex are anachronisms? Especially the former, in view of the fact that teenagers are at the height of their sexual powers? Even the good gray New York Times takes it for granted. In an editorial protesting certain criticisms of the availability of contraceptive devices to teenagers without parental consent, the Times editorialist wrote, Some Americans apparently find emotional satisfaction in encouraging teenagers to deny or postpone their sexuality. It is a costly fantasy, diverting attention and resources from a real world. Why indeed postpone or deny the sexuality of teenagers? Admitting the true state of affairs is surely more honest than retaining a Christian veneer and practicing the sexual mores of Dallas and the Love Boat. Does it only remain then to pause and wonder how such a mistaken view of sexuality could have informed the entire Western world for 2,000 years? One needs to speak plainly here. It is, after all, not a small matter to discard such a traditional view so casually and so quickly, nor should one deceive oneself about the consequences of correcting the mistake. The deception may come from concealing from oneself the inevitable nature of sexuality in a post-Christian and technological society by substituting for the lost God and the lost commandment such surrogate goals as responsible sexuality, commitment, sharing, and so on. These humane and, in fact, admirable properties of a good sexuality, as opposed to a bad sexuality, may in fact obtain, but it is necessary to note, without prejudice, that one's sexual behavior is viewed objectively as an option of the autonomous self. It will also be viewed necessarily and quite reasonably as a source of pleasure and a need satisfaction, and as such subject to those techniques of the age by which such satisfactions are best arrived at, and with the least damage to others. And why not? Cannot recreational sex be enjoyed responsibly, that is, without damage to one's health or the health of others, physical health and emotional health? One can eat one's cake and have it too. The words responsibility, mutuality, sharing, caring are easily added. The cake's icing. This is a remarkably prescient passage here because we see the 1960s, the sexual revolution. There was the birth control pill, and I suppose all else followed from that, but the skids had been greased in the 1950s. You see the intellectual movements among a cadre there, before they gain wider expression in the 1960s and then become mainstream in the 1970s. But we were taught, and I'm old enough to remember being taught this, that it is this repression that is responsible for so much violence in the world. And if sexual repression is ended, then there will be a great drop-off in violence. Well, that's not what happened. In fact, the tremendous increase in sexual license went hand in hand with an enormous increase of violence, particularly in what we call the inner cities, particularly amongst Black Americans, where there is wholesale sexual license, where in the United States, something like, I believe more than 75% of children in the United States, of Black children in the United States, are illegitimate now. So there's very little repression there, but it doesn't seem to have made any difference in terms of violence. Now, he talks about technique, the techniques of the age, and eros, sexuality for its own sake, being regulated by these techniques. Can anyone doubt that is now the norm? I was struck, 25 years ago, that if you find yourself in a large bookstore, a Chapters in Canada, or what Barnes & Noble in the United States, if Barnes & Noble still exists, and you're looking at the various sections, you will come across a section, sexuality. And you will notice that a great many of the books are about varying kinds of sexual dysfunction. How could this happen? If we are free to do whatever we like, why is all this sexual dysfunction? Why are the magazines for women and Teen Vogue carrying on about vibrators, and other sexual tools? Well, if sex is freely available and there are no restrictions on it, and in fact sexual license is celebrated, why is it necessary for machines to be necessary for people to enjoy this unfettered sexuality? The recent indications is that sex, that is to say, sex between to people is becoming less and less and less important, less interesting to them, especially to young people. Now, this book came out before the AIDS epidemic, which was one of the results of this sexual license. And there are several references in the book to Buena Vista Park in San Francisco, where some man enjoying being filleted or doing that himself for the 500th time. You see that Percy has a rather dim view of this. So, yes, sexuality is just another technique now. This idea of it being going from a kind of mystical union between two people, who've been married in the Christian religion, to a kind of secular mystical union. Well, there was a lot of talk about that in the 1960s and the 1970s, but there's no talk about that anymore. It's a very mechanical thing now, and of course, one doesn't need people. Well, there's high definition porn for free on the internet, and Percy deduces, from the tremendous increase in the use of pornography, the use of drugs, that there is something deranged about our society. The book is largely a section of questions, quizzes of people. And it becomes obvious to the reader, when you're 20 or 30 pages in, that there are really no right and wrong answers to his questions. A lot of them there's a lot of thought experiments, that you look at a situation, an activity, an event from the point of view of different people. And he begins the book by asking a question. If you have a telescope and you can see a planet, and you can read about a planet, and very quickly you learn more about that foreign object. Yes, specifically. Why is it possible to learn more in 10 minutes about the Crab Nebula in Taurus, which is 6,000 light years away, than you presently know about yourself, even though you've been stuck with yourself all your life? Well, the reason for that is that we had ways of explaining our role in the universe, but they have fallen to the wayside. They've been abandoned, as, I don't know, what would you say, not scientific, and science, we are ruled by science now. Yes, totemism. Ask a Bororo tribesman, who are you? He may reply, I am a parakeet. Ask a LSU fan at a football game, who are you? He may reply, I am a tiger. This is what Percy calls the cosmological self. And then there is the Brahmin Buddhist self. Who are you? What is yourself? Myself in this life is impaled on the wheel of non-being, obscured by the veil of unreality. But it can realize itself by penetrating the veil of Maya and plumbing the depths of self until it achieves nirvana, nothingness, the Christian self. And to a degree, the Judaic and Islamic self. The self sees itself as a creature created by God, estranged from God by an aboriginal catastrophe, and now reconciled with him. Before the reconciliation, the self is, as Paul told the Ephesians, a stranger to every covenant, with no promise to hope for, with the world about you and no God. But now the self becomes a son of God, a member of a family of selves, and is conscious of itself as a creature of God, embarked upon a pilgrimage in this life and destined for happiness and reunion with God in a later life. Number 4, the role-taking self. One sociological view of the self is that the self achieves its identity by taking roles and modeling its own role from the roles of others, e.g. one's mother, father, housewife, breadwinner, macho boy, man, feminine doll girl, etc. And also, as George Mead said, upon how one perceives others' perceptions of oneself. Number 5, the standard American Jeffersonian high school commencement Republican Democratic platform self. The self is an individual entity created by God and endowed with certain inalienable rights and the freedom to pursue happiness and fulfill its potential. It achieves itself through work, participation in society, family, the marketplace, the political process, cultural activities, sports, the sciences, and the arts. The diverted self. In a free and affluent society, the self is free to divert itself endlessly from itself. It works in order to enjoy the diversions that the fruit of one's labor can purchase. The pursuit of happiness becomes the pursuit of diversion, and in this society, the possibilities of diversion are endless and are as readily available as 8 hours of television a day. TV, sports, travel, drugs, games, newspapers, magazines, Vegas. And we see that I suppose the diverted self is now the norm, particularly since the diversions have now become interactive. Television is not interactive. You sit and it speaks to you. Video games are very much interactive, and that's much more compelling than television. I mean, in the sense that television, movies, no one is lecturing to you. No one is saying, pay attention, don't miss this bit or none of it will make any sense. You can pause a video game at any time and pick it up whenever you like. The lost self. With the passing of the cosmological myths and the fading of Christianity as a guarantor of the identity of the self becomes dislocated, Jefferson or no Jefferson, cut loose and imprisoned by its own freedom, yet imprisoned by a curious and paradoxical bondage like a Chinese handcuff, so that the very attempts to free itself, e.g. by ever more refined techniques for the pursuit of happiness, only tighten the bondage and distance the self ever farther from the very real world it wishes to inhabit as its homeland. H, the scientific and artistic self. Of that self which is so totally absorbed in the pursuit of art or science as to be selfless. The modern caricature is the absent-minded professor or the demonic possessed artist, which is to say that as a self, he is absent from the usual concerns of the self about itself in the world, e.g. Karl von Frisch and his bees, Schubert in a beer hall writing Leda on the tablecloth, Picasso in a restaurant modeling animals for bread. Now, I should point out that when Walker Percy wrote this book, which is almost 40 years ago, it was still understood, that art was important. I suppose there were fewer people in the middle class who paid attention to art or cared about art than there had been in the recent past, but pretty much everyone was agreed that art was important. Well, that consensus is gone now. Art's for losers and fags now. Let's see. Poetry is dead, the short story is dead, the novel is dying. We have the screenplay, but what do you have? How many people is responsible for a screenplay now? Or it has to go through, Kathleen Kennedy's feminist commissars at Disney. The lone artist, the rather suspicious person. I, the illusory self, or the conviction that one sense of oneself is a psychological or cultural illusion, and that with the advance of science, e.g. behaviorism, Levi-Strauss's structuralism, the self will disappear. J, the autonomous self. The self sees itself as a sovereign and individual consciousness, liberated by education from the traditional bonds of religion, by democracy from the strictures of class, by technology from the drudgery of poverty, and by self-knowledge from the tyranny of the unconscious. And therefore free to pursue its own destiny without God. And finally, the totalitarian self. The self sees itself as a creature of the state, fascist or communist, and understands its need to be specified by the needs of its state. Now, he mentioned something, and this is tremendously insightful, that it commonly happens that people go to a clothing store, and the employee of the clothing store will say something, you try on shirt, pair of pants, a jacket, or whatever. This is you, the salesman or the saleswoman will say. And it's rather a challenge, Oh, if this is me, then this means that I can have a new identity, that I can change my identity as simply as buying, a new suit or a new set of clothes. That he mentions that and again, this is a commonplace, but people don't think much about it. That think about the clothes that one used to wear a generation ago. There's a kind of an embarrassment there. I remember the 1970s when the lapels went out to here, and the ties were this wide, and the shoe heels for men were this high, and men wore what was called elephant bells, so that you were constantly tripping on your pant leg and stumbling and tearing the hem of your pants. And I look at that now and think, this is ridiculous. How is that possible? But you see, we take on, we're searching new identities. We're searching for a way to live in the world, and clothes are one way that we can do it. Now, you can extend what he says there. That he says that women will say, "I have nothing to wear," and men frequently become highly irritated at this because they can point to an entire closet, a large closet, overflowing with clothes, but what the woman is saying is actually psychologically accurate, because there is nothing that she owns, there is no clothing that she owns that expresses the way that she feels now. There is nothing that matches her personality as she sees it at that moment. Yes, what does the sales lady mean when she fits a customer with an article of clothing and says, "It's you"? A, she means the same thing the customer means if you should ask her. "It is becoming to me. It looks nice. I don't have a thing to wear. It does something for me." B, she means that the hat, the blouse, hairstyle, dress, actually accentuates your best features, eyes, hair, while minimizing your worst, no neck, etc. C, it will please your husband or lover. D, it will impress other women. E, most other women are already wearing it and you look dowdy without it. F, the salesman means what she says. It really is you. That is, you are not much without it. You perceive yourself as mousy, and you are a something, yourself, in fact, your new true self with it. This is you. I see the prediction of identity politics. There's not a lot about race in this book, because racial politics in the United States were not particularly, they didn't dominate everything the way that they do now at that time in the early 80s. But, okay, this explains what John Derbyshire calls the blackety black, black, black phenomenon. Who are you? I am black. And that's sufficient. That is sufficient. That is sufficient to anchor yourself in the world. The fact that there are hundreds of millions of black people and none of them are just like you is apparently irrelevant, but we see this fraying because we have the rise of intersectionality. It's you. Okay, I am black, and this black person is perhaps a lesbian black, and this person is perhaps disabled or claims to be disabled in some way. And so that's 3 times better, is it not? These are 3 claims, interlocking, intersectional claims to belonging in the world. Does it strike you as strange that people, particularly young people, are overjoyed to tell you that they suffer from some sort of mental illness which has been professionally diagnosed or they have diagnosed themselves? That in the past, this was scandalous. Even if it were true, you kept it to yourself because people would think worse of you if they knew this. But now this becomes an identity because I guess all the other forms of identity no longer avail. And you say, it's you. Does this not explain transsexualism? That it's not as if, these people who become transsexuals, they suffer from, they've been diagnosed with or believe themselves to suffer from something called gender dysphoria, which is supposedly a serious illness. That these people, almost to a man or a woman, are deeply unhappy people. And then one day, it's you. It all makes sense now. The reason I am deeply unhappy, these people say, is because they have been misgendered from birth. So now they have discovered the it's you, which gives them a place in the universe. It allows them, or so they believe, to be secure in the universe. Unfortunately for them, the evidence that we have is that post-op or post-whatever, they are not very secure in the universe. This book also serves as an introduction to semiotics, the study of science. And the difference between men and people and other objects and men, or that is to say mankind or humankind, and other creatures, is because of the triadic nature of language, which is not the same as communication. I mentioned on yesterday's show that scientists have spent a great deal of time and money and lost a lot of fingers bitten off by chimpanzees in an attempt to prove that chimpanzees, humpback whales, parrots, or whatever, have language. They do not have language, they have communication. And like everyone knows this. If you've ever had a dog who is scratching at a door or whining because he wants to go outside, wants to go to a walk, well, that's a form of communication. If you have a cat and the cat wakes you up by tapping on your head with the pad of its paw because it wants to be fed, well, the cat is communicating to you, but it does not have language. Another difference between man and animals is that, as a function of language, as a function of consciousness, that man is interested in other creatures, but other creatures are not interested in other creatures. They have absolutely no interest. I suppose at the heart of this book is what Miguel de Unamuno wrote in Tragic Sense of Life: consciousness is a disease. Now, Percy believes in the theory of evolution. I don't. Not particularly relevant to discussion of this book. But there was some great event some thousands of years ago in which humans attained consciousness. And there's really no explanation for this. And we see in the dispute between Darwin and Wallace, Percy is very much on the side of Wallace. The consciousness makes all the difference. That there is no conceivable, there's no conceivable comparison, between man and other creatures, because that's particularly relevant. I'll give you an example. People may be well-placed in all sorts of ways. They may be well-placed socially, financially. They may have a loving wife or girlfriend or whatever, and still they repine. And one of the reasons they repine is because, someone else has it better, or so they think. Dog doesn't think this way. A dog doesn't complain that, the dog across the street gets more expensive dog food. The dog doesn't complain that this is a rather shabby leash, that the dog toys and the like are not the best. The dog across the street gets taken to the doggy spa. I don't get taken to the doggy spa. Dogs don't carry on like that. Animals don't carry on like that. Only people carry on like that. And only people carry on like that because we have achieved consciousness. He doesn't seem to be much of a fan of Noam Chomsky in the way he regards language. He talks about the word apple, say. We all know what an apple is. It's not a signifier. Well, it very much is a signifier, and he says that you can prove this with a simple test. Just start saying apple, and keep saying apple, and after a few iterations, it's just a couple of phonemes. It doesn't mean anything. And people who have worked with words, or people who have read a lot, will see the same. Will have had the same experience. That you Let's say Sullivan. There's a name, and this appears frequently in this book because Miss Sullivan was the teacher, the famous teacher of Helen Keller, who gave her consciousness, gave her language by pouring water onto her hands and then spelling out the word water on her hand. But if you look at the word Sullivan over and over and over again, suddenly it doesn't make any sense anymore. It's a bunch of black on a white background. Again, these things have meaning because we ascribe meaning to them. I don't want to go too much into the semiology here. If one is interested in a crash course in semiology, this book is that, and it is many other things. I'll just give you an example here. He writes, the sign Canada is part of the world of most sign users. It can signify whatever lies at hand to be signified, either a place and a people one knows, or a large pink place on a map transected by longitudes and latitudes. If there is an unknown territory in the heart of Africa, it is labeled as such on maps and known to sign users as unknown territory. A cat has no myths and names, no real or imaginary beings. It responds to the cosmos exactly as it has learned or been programmed to respond. For the sign user, a world is imposed upon the cosmos to which he still responds like any other organism. For example, he still responds to signals, to heat, light, hunger, sudden noises, perhaps also to female pheromones, perhaps even to the magnetic field of the Earth and the gravitational attraction of the Moon. But there are other segments of the cosmos to which he does not respond, even though astrologers say he does. Now, I mentioned yesterday that about the scientists being so keen on proving that animals have language. Why? Percy ascribes it to the burden of consciousness. We are alone as a species. There are no other species in the world that are like us. There are no other species in the universe, in the cosmos, like us, and apparently this has become too much of a burden for us to deal with. Now, Stanley Kubrick's movie 2001: Space Odyssey, which was, he wrote the script with Arthur C. Clarke, the central conceit of that movie is that the discovery of intelligent life from elsewhere in the universe, specifically close to Jupiter, is so shocking to our consciousness that it must be kept secret. And so there is a phony story circulated about some sort of plague on the moon, and a secret mission is sent off towards Jupiter with many of the astronauts in a state of hibernation. Now, I suspect that half of people, more than half of people, believe that, oh, well, of course we know that there's life on other planets, intelligent life even. There is absolutely no evidence of this. Why? Why is this being pushed to us that this is the case? And he mentions the famous popular scientist Carl Sagan, and asks, why is Carl Sagan so anxious to establish communication with an ETI, extraterrestrial intelligence? Carl Sagan is right in ridiculing the absurd pseudosciences now so popular. He is admirable in his defense of science as a reliable and self-correcting method of attaining truth. Yet the fact that nowadays there is no piece of nonsense that will not be believed by some, and no guru or radio preacher, however corrupt, who will not attract a following. Now, why? Why are people these days generally indifferent to science and yet willing to believe any absurd claim and any rascal who puts it forward? A, because there is a need in humans for myth, for symbols, to construe and order a confusing and hostile environment. B, because as Chesterton said, when man stops believing in God, he will believe in anything at all. Sagan is right in saying that despite all the claims of UFO sightings and encounters of a third kind, extraterrestrial creatures and such, not a single artifact, e.g. a piece of metal, a bit of clothing of a visitor, a piece of tissue, a fingernail, has been recovered. Yet Sagan has written whole volumes promoting the probability of the existence of intelligent life on the billions of planets orbiting the billions and billions of stars in our galaxy, let alone the billions of other galaxies. This in spite of the fact that there is no evidence that life exists anywhere else in the cosmos, let alone intelligent life. Of all the billions of electromagnetic waves from the cosmos received here on Earth, not a single one can be attributed to an ETI. Therefore, one might ask Sagan the same question he put to UFOers. Of all the countless bits of data received from outer space, the observations of astronomers, the millions of units recorded by radio telescopes, why has not a single bit of information been received which could not be attributed to the random noise of the cosmos? And he asked the question, why is Carl Sagan so lonely? A, Sagan is lonely because as a true devotee of science, a noble and reliable method of attaining knowledge, he feels increasingly isolated in a world in which, as Bronowski has said, there is a failure of nerve and men seem willing to undertake anything other than the rigors of science and believe anything at all. In Velikovsky, von Daniken, even in Mr. and Mrs. Barney Hill, who reported being captured and taken aboard a spacecraft in Vermont. B, Sagan is lonely because after great expectations, he has not discovered ETIs in the cosmos because chimpanzees don't talk, dolphins don't talk, humpback whales sing only to other humpback whales, and he has heard nothing but random noise from the cosmos, and because Vikings 1 and 2 failed to discover evidence of even the most rudimentary organic life in the soil of Mars. C, Sagan is lonely because once everything in the cosmos, including man, is reduced to the sphere of immanence, matter in interaction, there was no one left to talk to except other transcending intelligences, in other words. Now, this book ends with what is I suppose you could say, a science fiction story, an apocalyptic story of the end of life as we know it. Sanity, to Walker Percy, leads back to Thomism, to the scholastic theology developed by St. Thomas Aquinas. This book is a kind of, it's a fun book, and it's full of exciting philosophical ideas, and it is also, introduction to semiology, but it's also, the book wonders quite seriously whether mankind can survive, because without ourselves being rooted in the cosmos in some way that makes sense and is workable, then everything flies apart. And we see that happening now. We had the panic, we had the Cold War panic, the nuclear winter panic, then the climate change panic, and now this preposterous COVID-19 panic. There seems to be a feeling, a great feeling, perhaps it's an inchoate feeling, it's not well expressed, that we are tremendously sinful and we must be punished. There must be a reckoning, there must be a great bloodletting or a Malthusian die-off. And I would agree with Walker Percy that the reason for this is that we have lost our way, that we have lost the ability to find a holistic relationship with the cosmos. And this must be regained if we are to survive. And this is a book which repays repeated readings because it is so full of ideas and provocations. It really is a remarkable work. So those are my thoughts on Walker Percy's Lost in the Cosmos, and I will take a final look at the chat. YT says, cats are the absolute best animals to live with at home. I adore them. I'd love to get to know better other species as well. I like horses and cows. Horses and cows are certainly handsome to look at. I like cats very much. Oh, I suppose the reason is you make an investment in them. Cats are hunting animals and they love to play, and they will play with you in that manner. They will hunt you, and it's fairly easy, to teach them to do so, and it's a great deal of fun. They're very affectionate animals, but only if they want to be. I also like them because they're so capricious. Anyone who's ever had a cat knows that a cat will have its favorite place to sleep. And then one day it decides, nope, No, I'm not sleeping there anymore. This is the last place on earth I want to be. And if, maybe the cat is pestering you for something or other, and you decide, okay, go to your sleeping place, and you put the cat back, and that place has all this cat hair on it because the cat spent so much time sleeping there. Nope, I'm not staying here. I've moved on to something completely different. Some birds talk. Yes, that is true. And Percy talks at some length about some parrot, which was deemed to be capable of language, but it's not language. I remember some years ago talking to a friend. Peter Serafinowicz had this show called, curiously enough, the Peter Serafinowicz Show, and it was Michael Six, the robot talk show host, and it was a Jerry Springer type talk show, only it was a robot asking the questions. And so, a typical sleazy situation, you have this couple, and the woman charges that the husband has been sleeping with her sister and has impregnated the sister, and she wants a test. And so the man denies it, but he says, "I'll take the test just to prove I've nought to do with that mad cow's nipper." And if a humpback whale or a chimpanzee can say that, then I will believe that it is capable of language. Okay, so Mr. Dalmatia says pets are supposed to be for kids. To each authority and responsibility, any of the use is a symptom of modernism. Well, fur babies, I just don't know. They're not babies. They're not people. They're not even like people. And there's a lot of, children are often not good with animals. Children are at risk from animals, particularly from cats. Good idea to keep young children away from cats because they don't put up with much. If you keep poking at a cat or grabbing its tail or whatever, the cat will attack you. In any event, that is the show for tonight. I'd like to thank you all for watching or listening, or both. If you like the show or any part of it, I would greatly appreciate it if you would click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already. If you wish to support the show with a donation, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. I wish you all a fine weekend, with the caveat that, once again, I hope that in these days of total atomization that you all manage to find some genuine human connection. Good night.